The screens on the far wall went red one by one, and the operations center stopped breathing. A client's voice cracked over the speaker, then dropped. Grace Sutton turned from the console, found the man in the gray workshirt bent over the secure terminal, and pointed. "Get him out. Now." 2 officers pushed through the glass doors. The man did not straighten right away. When he did, he looked only at her. "They're not here for me," he said. The room went still. Nobody else moved. She stared at him. He did not look away. The 2 officers stopped where they stood. One of them looked at the man in the gray shirt, then down at the badge on his own belt, and something moved across his face. He had seen that face before, in a photograph in the lobby, half hidden behind a fern no one ever watered. "Sir," the officer said, not to Grace, to the man. Grace heard it and did not understand it. She was still holding the edge of the console, still braced for a fight she thought she was winning. "He was inside a live terminal during a client event," she said. "I want him out, and his access pulled tonight." The man reached into the chest pocket of the work shirt and set a card on the desk between them. Not a contractor pass, a board credential, matte and heavy. Nathan Brennan. She read the name twice. It did not land the first time. Everyone at Ardent Systems knew the name Brennan, the way people know the word carved over a door. Co-founder. The chairman who had stopped coming in. The one the board spoke of and never produced. "That isn't possible," she said, and heard her own voice lose its edge. "Brennan hasn't been in this building in 2 years," Nathan said. "I know." She straightened. Whatever else was true, she was the chief executive of this company, and she reached for that the way a person reaches for a railing. "I run this floor. I don't care what your name is. You don't walk onto a secure system in the middle of a go-live, and you're right that you run this floor." He picked the card back up. "You don't run the shares that decide who sits above it. I do. Tonight, that's the only sentence that matters." The client line had gone dead. 14 people stood frozen around them, watching a fight whose rules had changed under their feet. Grace's jaw set. She did not answer. She turned and walked out through the glass doors, and the room exhaled behind her. Across the city, in a narrow house in the Highlands with the porch light left on, a girl of 9 sat at the kitchen table sorting a jar of buttons by color because she liked the sound they made. Hazel Brennan knew only that her father had promised to be home before the buttons were finished, and he was not, and the pile of blue ones had gotten very tall. When Nathan finally came in, he stood in the doorway a moment before she noticed him. He still wore the gray shirt. "You started without me," he said. "You were slow," Hazel said, and slid the jar toward the empty chair. He sat. He sorted buttons. He did not think about the woman he had fired, or the screens going red, or the reason he had been at that terminal at all, a reason he had told no one, which had nothing to do with a client and everything to do with a set of numbers that had no business existing. He thought about it later, after she was asleep, the jar in his hands. He had gone into that room to watch. He had ended the night firing the person in charge of it, and he still did not know whether he had caught the problem or become part of it. By morning, the story had its own weather. In the break rooms and the stairwells, people who had never met Nathan Brennan spoke about him with the certainty of people repeating a legend. Grace heard the pieces from 3 assistants before she finished her first coffee. The platform, every Arden client, ran on the control layer they sold to hospitals and transit systems and water districts. The thing the whole company was had a name on every login screen. Ardent Core. She had assumed it was a marketing word. It was not. It was his. He had written the first version alone, in a rented unit off Santa Fe Drive, before there was a company to put it in. There was more, and the more made her set the coffee down. A firm out of the Bay had come for Arden 9 years back with an offer she had heard, named in numbers that did not sound real. 9 figures, cash and paper. The founder had said no, not negotiated, no. In an industry that treated selling as the point, a man who turned down that much money to keep a thing independent became a kind of ghost story admired, half believed, never seen. She found him in a small conference room he had claimed without asking. The gray shirt gone, a plain jacket in its place, a laptop open that was not company issue. "You could have said who you were," she said, "before you did that in front of my team. I didn't come back to say who I was." He turned the laptop toward her. "I came back because of these." It was a spend ledger, vendor by vendor, month by month, and someone had run a thin red line under a column of figures that climbed in a way figures do not climb on their own. "I know these numbers," Grace said slowly. "I flagged this 8 months ago. I was told it was reconciled. I was told I didn't understand the procurement cycle." For the first time, Nathan looked at her, really looked. The way you look at a person you have just discovered was standing in the same dark room the whole time. "Who told you that?" he asked. She didn't answer yet. She was doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with money. He closed the laptop. "My wife built half of this company," he said, and the room went quieter around the sentence. "Laura. She stood in front of people. I was the one in the back. When she died, I stopped being able to watch a thing she'd loved run without her, so I stopped watching it at all. Someone noticed I wasn't watching. So you came back as a technician," Grace said, "to see it without being seen. There's a 9-year-old at my house who's going to inherit whatever this becomes. I'd like it to be worth inheriting." Grace stood very still. The night before, she had thought the worst thing in her life was the man who had fired her. Now she understood something colder, and it reorganized everything. If Nathan Brennan had come back in secret to hunt a leak in his own company, if he had been at that terminal because the leak had teeth, then the crash that ended her career in front of a client had not been a failure at all. It had been aimed, and the man who had fired her for it had just fired the wrong person. Nathan did not tell her she was cleared. He was not a man who handed out relief he had not earned the right to give. What he did was slower and harder. He walked into the office of the company council that afternoon and put the termination on hold. Grace Sutton would remain, under review, her access to the operations floor restored, with a chairman's flat instruction that no one move against her until he said so. "You're keeping the person you fired," the council said carefully. "I'm keeping the person who flagged this 8 months before I did. Fire her and I lose the only executive who already knows where the bodies are." They started that evening, in the same conference room, with the incident log spread across the table like a patient. It was not comfortable. She questioned his read of the failover sequence. He questioned her assumption that the outage began where the alarms said it began. Twice they talked over each other. Once she was flatly right and he stopped, reread the line, and said so without decoration. Once he was right and she did the same. They were, it turned out, very good at the same thing, which is a difficult way to start trusting someone. Neither of them liked it, and neither of them stopped. Somewhere in the 3rd hour she caught him rubbing his eyes and slid a fresh printout across without being asked, and he took it without a word, and that was the whole of it. Around 9, the door opened without a knock, and the temperature of the room changed. Curtis Doyle came in the way weather comes in, filling the space before he was fully through the door. Chief Operating Officer, 8 years in the building, the man who actually ran the machine while the chairman was a ghost and the CEO was new. He had a smile that arrived a half-second before it was needed. "Nathan." He said the first name like a key turning in a lock. The boards rattled. "People are frightened. I've been telling everyone this is a stability problem, not a scandal, and the adults in the room will steady it before Monday." He glanced at Grace, and the glance was a small, precise thing. "Grace. Glad you're still with us. However, this shakes out." "Why wouldn't she be?" Nathan said. "No reason at all. I just want the noise down while we sort the technical side. I've already asked procurement to package the vendor files, so no one goes digging through raw records and misreads something. Cleaner for everyone." "Cleaner," Nathan repeated. Cleaner, Curtis agreed, and left the smile behind him like a scent. When the door shut, Grace looked at the logs, then at Nathan. He offered to package the vendor files, she said. Those are the files. I know. He runs procurement. Every purchase order in that ledger routes through his approvals. She was not accusing yet. She was assembling. For 8 months, every time I asked a question, the answer came back through his office reworded as my own failure. I thought I was bad at the job. Her voice went level and cold and certain. I wasn't isolated by accident. Nathan watched her arrive at the thing he had already begun to suspect. No, he said. You weren't. A floor away, Curtis Doyle stood at a dark window and watched the two of them through the conference room wall and did not smile at all. They worked past midnight more than once that week. It stopped being an assignment and became a thing they did, the way people fall into a rhythm without agreeing to it. 2 screens, 2 chairs, a pot of coffee neither of them drank fast enough, so it was always half full and always cold. At some point, Grace realized she had stopped bracing every time Nathan spoke. She could not have said when. There was a stretch near 2 in the morning where neither said anything for 20 minutes, both reading, and the silence did not feel like a gap to be filled. It felt like company. She noticed that, filed it somewhere, and did not examine it. Walter Boyd came to them on a Thursday, and Walter Boyd was afraid. He was the oldest badge in the building, operations and facilities. The man who had kept the lights on since before there was a second floor. He had known Laura. He said her name first, quietly, the way people offer a password. I sent you the note, he said to Nathan. 6 weeks ago. About the numbers. He turned a cup in his hands without drinking. I only sent one. I've wanted to send more. Send more now, Nathan said. Walter looked at the door the way a man looks at a thing that might open. The vendor chain, the middle of it. There's a stretch of purchase orders where the goods don't add up to the money. I've seen where it turns. Then he stopped. He set the cup down. I can't. Not yet. Not the way you need me to. There's a reason, and the reason is mine, and I'm not proud of it. Walter, not yet, the old man said, and left, and the room went heavier when he did. Nathan did not chase him. He knew the shape of a man carrying something he was ashamed of. He had carried a few. It was Grace who broke the quiet. Later, when she came by the house on Fairview to drop hard copies he'd asked for, expecting to hand them off at the door. The porch light was on. Through the front window she could see the kitchen, and at the table a girl building something out of dominoes, narrating it to no one. Hazel opened the door before Nathan got there. Are you the one from work? The girl asked, with the frank courtesy of the very young. I suppose I am, Grace said. He's slow tonight, too. You can wait. There's a chair. She considered Grace another second. It doesn't wobble. Grace sat in the chair that did not wobble. She did not talk about work, because the girl did not, and for the length of one small conversation about dominoes, it did not seem to exist. When Nathan came out with the papers, he found the CEO he had fired being taught the rules of a game his daughter had invented that afternoon, and he stood in the hall a moment before either of them saw him. Later, at the office, he took the termination letter out of the drawer. He held it. He did not shred it. He put it back. He was not ready to end the thing on paper, but he had stopped believing in it, and that was its own kind of moving. Curtis Doyle did not wait to be cornered. He had spent 8 years learning where the board's fears lived, and he went there directly. By the following week, the story had a new shape, and the new shape had Nathan and Grace at the center of it. A hidden chairman, gone for 2 years, materializes out of nowhere and fires the chief executive in front of a client. Then this was the detail Curtis fed most carefully. He doesn't fire her. He keeps her. He installs the woman who lost the company its biggest live demo, and the two of them lock themselves in a room every night with records no one else is allowed to see. Ask yourself, the story said, without quite saying it, what 2 people hide in a locked room. It was not true. It was built entirely out of true things, which is the hardest kind of lie to pull apart. The board convened by video on a Tuesday, and the questions came at Grace like weather. Why had the demo failed under her watch? Why was she still here? What, precisely, was she reviewing? By what authority? And why, in private? Grace felt the old instinct rise, the one that had kept her alive in rooms like this her whole career, to give them less of a target. To step back, she had survived by not being the person standing in the open. "I'd like to request a leave," she started, until the review. "No," Nathan said. Every window on the call turned toward him. "She stays in the room. She stays because 8 months ago she flagged the exact irregularity this company is now pretending to discover, and an officer of this company told her she didn't understand procurement. I have the ledger. I have the date. If the board wants to review someone's judgment, start there." He let it sit. He had put himself in front of her. Grace understood it as it happened, and did not have a word for what it did. But Curtis had a second move, and he made it where no one could see. He went to Walter Boyd that same night. He did it kindly, which was the worst part. He reminded Walter of a batch of purchase orders from 4 years back, a bad quarter, a rushed approval. Walter's signature on documents Curtis had quietly doctored before they reached his desk. "You approved them," Curtis said gently. "That's the record. If this becomes a fraud matter, the first name in the paperwork is yours. I'd hate that. I'd hate it for you." He patted the old man's shoulder on the way out. Walter went home and did not sleep. The one man who could point at the middle of the chain was now the man with the most to lose by opening his mouth. By Friday, every road out had a wall across it. The evidence sat in a locked room the board distrusted. The witness who knew the truth had been muzzled with his own signature. Nathan had spent his authority holding the line, and the line was bending under him. And then a name no one in the building had ever bothered to learn asked to speak to the chairman, alone. His name was Dale Kimball, and almost no one could have picked him out of the floor. He was 26, 3 years into a job that mostly involved being awake when everyone else was not. He worked the overnight side of the field team, the same team Nathan had quietly joined as Nate, though Dale had never once suspected the tired man on the graveyard rotation was the chairman of the company. He came into the conference room with a laptop held against his chest like something that might break, and he stood until Nathan told him to sit. "You set the protocol," Dale said, sideways, "the way people say the thing they rehearsed in the wrong order. When you joined the field team, you told us to keep raw log captures, immutable ones, right once." Everybody groaned about it. "It doubles the storage. It's a pain, nobody reads them." On the screen was the night of the crash, rendered not as alarms and red boxes but as the machine had actually experienced it. Every command, every session, every credential, in sequence, in a format no one had thought to sanitize because no one had known it survived. "The story is that the system failed," Dale said. "It didn't fail. It was told to stop." He pointed near a line without touching the screen. "That's a shutdown command, authenticated. It didn't come from a fault. It came from a session opened under a vendor service account." He swallowed. "That account has standing approval. Standing approval means one signature keeps it alive, renews it, and greenlights the maintenance windows it's allowed to act in." "Whose signature?" Nathan said, though he already knew. Dale told him. The room did not erupt. That was the strange part. It went quiet in a specific way, the quiet of a thing clicking into the space cut for it. Curtis Doyle had not needed to touch a server. He had signed a piece of paper that let a machine be told to die, and then let a room full of people watch a woman get blamed for the dying. Grace had come in halfway through. She stood by the door with her arms folded and did not move for a long moment after Dale finished. Everything she had carried for 8 months, the sense that she was failing at something everyone else found easy. The slow isolation, the demo, the pointing finger, the walk out through the glass doors reorganized itself around a single fact. She had not been bad at the job. She had been standing in the blast radius of someone who needed a body on the ground. Nathan looked at her across the room. He had fired her in 90 seconds in front of her whole team. He had spent every day since climbing back down from that, and now he was standing at the bottom, holding proof of exactly how wrong 90 seconds could be. "I owe you a sentence," he said. "You owe me more than a sentence," Grace said. But there was no heat in it. There was something else, and neither of them named it. There was one thing left. Dale's logs proved the how. They did not, alone, prove the years of skimming underneath. For that, they needed the man who had seen where the vendor chain turned, and now, for the first time, Walter Boyd would not be speaking alone. The board met in person that Thursday, in the long room on the top floor where the light came in flat and gray off the mountains. Curtis Doyle arrived early and took a seat near the center. Nathan opened without ceremony. He laid out the ledger, first the vendor chain, the figures that climbed against the goods, the 8-year arc that steepened sharply after Laura's death, removed the last person who read the raw records. Then he set Dale's logs beside it and walked the board through the night of the crash, the authenticated shutdown, the vendor service account, the standing approval that kept that account alive. "One signature renews that account," Nathan said. "One signature defines the windows it can act in." The system didn't break during the demo. It was instructed to stop, through a door exactly one officer of this company holds the key to. Curtis did not flinch. 8 years had taught him that a room can be turned even against evidence, if you sound calmer than the person holding it. "This is remarkable," he said, spreading his hands, addressing the board and not Nathan. "A chairman who abandoned this company for 2 years reappears, fires our chief executive on a whim, realizes he's exposed himself legally, and now needs a villain. Of course the logs say what he needs them to say. His own team wrote the protocol that produced them. He's marking his own paper." He turned to Grace, with the old warmth. "Grace, you know me. Tell them this is madness." It dared the weakest-seeming person in the room to fold. Grace stood. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, over 8 cold months, how little volume the truth requires when it is finally allowed in the room. "I flagged this ledger 8 months ago. In writing. On a date you can all read." The reply came back through Curtis's office, and it told me I didn't understand procurement. She let it land. I believed it. That was my mistake, believing a man whose whole method was to make competent people doubt themselves in private and fail in public. She gestured at the screen without looking at it. "I'm not marking the paper. The machine marked it. Read the account name. Read whose signature keeps it breathing. Then ask Walter Boyd what happens to the money in the middle of that chain." The door opened, and Walter Boyd came in. He was not alone in the way that had silenced him before. Dale's logs were already on the screen. Whatever he said now was corroboration. Not one frightened man's word against a powerful one's. It let him stand up straight for the first time in 4 years. "The purchase orders I signed in the bad quarter were doctored before they reached me," he said, to the whole board. "By him. He kept that over my head to keep me quiet. I let him. I'm done letting him." He looked at Curtis without fear now. "The chain turns at the reseller. The overage goes out and comes back cleaner." The silence in the room changed sides, the way a current turns. Curtis felt it go, and for the first time said nothing at all. Nathan had stepped back against the wall while Grace spoke, and he stayed there. He had founded the company and held the shares that could end this with a word, and he understood the most powerful thing he could do was let her stand in the light. They did not look at each other. They were simply on the same side of the room, the last 2 people in it, still standing straight. The vote did not take long. Rooms move quickly once the current has turned. The words are only a formality laid over a thing that has already happened. Curtis Doyle was removed as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately, his access revoked before he had left the floor. The board voted to refer the vendor chain, the doctored purchase orders, and the shutdown routed through the service account to outside fraud counsel and, on counsel's advice, to the authorities who handle that kind of thing. There would be forensic accountants, there would be subpoenas. It would take months, and it would not be quiet. but it would be real, and it would go the right direction. Curtis stood, buttoned his jacket, and produced one last smile with nothing behind it. He looked at Nathan. "You'll wish you'd stayed a ghost," he said. "I did stay a ghost," Nathan said. "That's how you got this far." Curtis left. Security walked him out, the same glass doors, the same slow procession, only pointed at last at the person it had always belonged to. No one watched him go. They were already looking at the screen, at the work that remained. When the room finally emptied, it emptied all at once, until it was Nathan and Grace and the flat gray light off the mountains. Nathan reached into his jacket and took out a single folded page. Grace recognized it before it was open. The termination letter, the one he had never shredded, the one that had lived in a drawer through every night they had worked side by side, waiting to be signed or destroyed. He did not say anything about it. He tore it once, then again, and set the pieces on the table between them. Grace looked at the small pile of paper, then at him. "You kept it," she said. "Not an accusation, an observation about a man learning to admit he had been wrong." "I kept it because I didn't trust myself to know when I was wrong," he said. "I trust it now," she almost answered. She had a sentence ready about the company, the review, all the safe professional things a person says to fill a silence they are afraid of. She let it go, unsaid. There would be time for it, or there would not, and she found she could not tell which frightened her more. Outside the long windows, the first real cold of the season had come down off the peaks, and the light had the thin blue quality that comes just before snow. They stood in it a while without talking. The war was over. Curtis was gone. The company was saved, and the ledger was clean, and the machine would be told the truth about itself from now on. Everything that had needed answering had been answered, except the one question in the room that had nothing to do with any of it, the one neither of them had said out loud, the one that had been quietly assembling itself over every cold pot of coffee and every silence that had felt like company. It sat between them in the blue light, unspoken, waiting to see which of them would be brave enough to be first. Neither of them was. Not yet. The weeks after a thing like that are not dramatic. They are paperwork, which is its own kind of justice. The forensic accountants came, and Curtis Doyle's careful architecture came apart in their hands the way careful things do once someone is finally allowed to pull. The reseller at the turn of the chain flipped early and cheaply. The doctored purchase orders were traced to their real author. Walter Boyd, who had spent 4 years believing his one bad quarter would end him, was cleared in full, on the record, and Nathan made that decision personally and made sure Walter heard it from him and not from a memo. Dale Kimball, who almost no one could pick out of the floor, was pulled off the graveyard rotation and given the thing that mattered to him more than any title, the immutable log protocol to own and expand, company-wide, with his name on it. He was quietly stunned about it for a week and kept the assignment email open on a second monitor, glancing at it now and then the way a person checks that a thing is still real. Nathan did not take his old chair back. The board offered. Of course it offered. He declined. He had watched what a company does when the one person who reads the raw records disappears, and he had no intention of becoming a single point of failure a second time. Instead, he took a seat he defined narrowly and held firmly. Chairman, in fact as well as name, present, reading the records, standing behind the person who ran the floor. That person, he made clear, was Grace. He did not make a speech about it. He simply stopped clearing rooms for himself and started clearing them for her. He moved his own reviews to after hers. When the board looked for a face to steady the company, he stepped half a pace back so the face they found was hers. He did not persuade her to stay with words. He left a company-shaped space in exactly her size, and waited, without saying he was waiting. Grace noticed. She had spent a career reading rooms for threats, and it took her a strange while to learn to read one for the opposite. At home, something eased that had been braced for 2 years. Nathan had spent those years, without quite admitting it, watching doors. Any door. The habit had started the week Laura did not come home, and never fully stopped. Some part of him always half-turned toward the entrance, waiting for a person who was not going to walk through it. Hazel had grown up beside that habit without a name for it. One evening she looked up from the dominoes and found her father sitting with his back to the front door, entirely, telling her a story with his whole attention, not glancing past her shoulder once. "You're not doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The looking at the door thing. You always do it." Nathan sat with that a moment. Then he set the next domino for her, and did not look at the door, and found that he did not need to. The snow came for real in the last week of the year, the first true fall of it, the kind that arrives overnight and makes the whole city quiet by morning. Grace came by the house on Fairview because there were papers to sign, which was the reason she gave, and because she wanted to, which was the reason she did not. The porch light was on. It was always on now. She had stopped assuming it meant he was expecting someone else. Hazel met her at the door before Nathan could, the way she always did, and pulled her by one sleeve to the back window, where the yard had gone white and untouched and perfect. The three of them stood there looking at it, the girl in the middle, the two adults on either side, and for a while no one said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying, and a great deal that would have been spoiled by trying. "First one always looks like nobody's touched it yet," Hazel said, with the gravity of someone reporting a fact of great importance. Then she went to find her boots, because a yard like that is an emergency, and left them at the glass. Nathan and Grace watched her go out into the white and begin the serious work of ruining it, laughing, and neither of them moved from the window. The papers she had brought sat unsigned on the counter behind them, and neither of them thought about the papers. Grace was aware of the small distance between his hand and hers on the sill. She had been aware of it, in one form or another, for weeks. She did not close it, and neither did he. And yet the distance had changed character entirely. No longer a gap between two wary people, but the last comfortable inch before a thing both of them already knew was true. Two people who had spent years learning to guard the exits of every room, standing still, guarding nothing. He shifted, half an inch, so his shoulder was against hers. That was all. He did not say anything. He had never been a man who announced the things that mattered. He had learned, the hard way, that the things that matter are the ones you show up for, quietly, and keep showing up for. She let her weight rest against him. She did not move away, and neither did he. And the snow kept falling, and the room stayed warm, and for a long moment, that was the whole of it. Outside, Hazel had made an angel in the snow and was arguing with it. The light off the yard filled the room, thin and clean, and it lay across the two of them at the window without asking anything of either. And Nathan Brennan, who had spent 2 years half-turned toward every entrance he passed, waiting for a person who was never going to come through it, stood with his back to the door and did not think about it once. There was no reason to watch it anymore. Everyone he was waiting for was already in the house. For 2 years, he had watched every door. Tonight, he let it stay closed.